Hello, my name is Lucas Fowler. I am with Lion Creek Design, and I am going to show you how to make a hand-riven peg. There was a previous video that showed how I got these blanks, these kind of roughed out blanks, from a big piece of oak using a froe. If you haven't seen that, then go ahead and watch that first. This video is going to show how I turn this rough blank into a finished peg. This is what I'm trying to get to from this, and I'm going to use a few tools. This is a shave horse. This is a shave horse I've had for a bunch of years. I got the plans for it off the internet. You can see I've made some modifications and done some different things to it, but it's really basic. I just use these little scraps of wood that I had laying around the shop with some hardware I picked up from the hardware store. Really basic. I don't know what it cost me, 20 bucks to make, something like that. The sky's the limit on designs, but the basic premise is you have a piece of wood here that's relatively fixed. You can move this block and kind of change the location up and down, which allows you to use different size pieces. These two long pieces here with a pivot, what it's doing is it's allowing me to use my feet to hold this piece of wood steady. So I can then use this, which is a draw knife. Essentially just a long, sharp blade and two handles. So yeah, designs on the shave horses can be really varied. As long as they accomplish this task, it doesn't really matter what they look like or what they're made out of. Draw knives too, also very varied. There's modern ones with these weird pivots on the handles. This is an antique one I got at a flea market for, I think I got it for 10 bucks or something, and then just sharpen it up. They're a pretty unique tool. You can see this is an old one. It's got, so this is a hand-forged blade. They took, and this is a long tapered piece of metal that goes through here, and then they, I don't know if you can see it on the end, where it pokes out, they just bent it over on these handles. I've had this one for a bunch of years, and I like it because it's a little smaller than most common draw knives. For making pegs, you don't need a really wide-handled or thick-bladed draw knife. This is a pretty light-duty one, which is perfect for what I'm trying to do here. I also have a way to check the size of the peg. So this is a large piece of white oak with a 1-inch hole drilled on it, into it, and I just use that to see how the peg fits. You know, where is it too big? Is it just way too small? This is really important process to be able to just test your pegs. You can, when you make them by hand, you're going to have a bunch of different sizes, and that's fine, but having a little bit of consistency is pretty important. So this just allows me to have that consistency. Alright, so here's the process. The first thing I do is I just look at my blank and try to assess what's going on. You can see that one end is a little bit more out of shape than the other end. This end is the end that I used, or that I was facing up when I split the blank out with the froe. So it's pretty close to square. And then as it followed the grain through the piece of wood, it ended up kind of misshapen. I'm also looking at the grain and trying to figure out if the grain is traveling out significantly. Are there any big splits? All kinds of stuff. But the more close to square end is the end I start with in the head of the shave horse. I'm trying to go from this rough piece to a long square piece that's about 1 inch by 1 inch. I'm constantly, when I'm using the draw knife, I'm constantly watching the grain and listening to what's happening with the draw knife going through the wood. So for example, I'm seeing that this grain starts here, turns, and then starts going straight. This long run of growth right here, you can see the difference in the rings. Having that go straight and not leave the side of the piece means that I'm at least close to having the grain continuous from here to here and not having it run out of the surface. It's not a guaranteed. It depends on which way the tree is going. You know, this is the top of the tree, the bottom, and how the rings are shaped and all kinds of stuff. But that's a good guide. I'm also listening, so you can hear this sound is kind of a hissing sound. There's no splitting. When I'm taking pieces that are split in grain out, it pops like that. And I'm watching not only the color, but there's little bits of tear out. So now I've got the grain running from one end to the other straight this whole side. So that means that the grain that starts here is going all the way through the piece, unbroken, to here. So now I'm just going to continue to go around the little blank, squaring it off, cleaning it up. This is part of the reason why in the previous video where I said I like to use something that's slightly bigger than 1 inch to make my blanks, because I want to have enough material to work here. If this was to start off as exactly 1 inch, you're just not going to have enough to really work with here. So there we go. I do have a couple of marks on this top piece where I can just set it up there and see how I'm doing if I'm close to 1 inch. There a mark that's 1 inch off the face, so I can really quickly just assess how close I am to 1 inch. At this stage, you want it to be slightly under 1 inch. The reason for that is because when you end up with this octagonal shape, the corners are going to stick out farther than these faces. So if you have these two faces exactly 1 inch apart, the corners are going to be more than 1 inch. You're never going to get it through your hole. So there we go. You can see it's curved. The grain that starts here ends here. The color of the rings is going from end to end without, veering off to the side. It is curved. It is following the grain through the piece. It's not straight. You didn't do this on a saw. That's fine. So now I've got my 1 inch by 1 inch blank. I take the end that's slightly bigger, face it towards me, and then I've got a notch in my little cross piece here that allows me to put the piece in like this, so it looks like a diamond versus a square. So I'm going to put it in that little notch. I'm going to take off the corners and start to form that octagonal shape. Other people prefer shapes of pegs that are closer to round, shapes of pegs that are, start off octagonal and then end up being square. I prefer the octagonal shape. I really like that shape. It is relatively traditional. I think that's what most of the old pegs I've found in old buildings have been, octagonal. All right, so there we go. So I'm not bulging in the middle, which is called a pregnant peg, kind of as a joke, but that's a common mistake, is to shave the ends down and have this big bulge in the middle. But I'm relatively straight all the way across the peg. It's now an octagon, or at least close to an octagon. You can see the end. Both ends are relatively octagonal. At this stage, I'm now going to put a point on it, just to help when you're raising the frame to be able to get it started into the piece. And particularly with drawbore, you want to have some kind of point so it doesn't catch on the edge of the hole. All right, there we go. I think we're pretty close there. Just kind of cleaning up the faces a little bit, making sure it's going to be close to size. Now I'm going to see how it fits. That's not bad. So I prefer to have a peg that's a little skinnier here and then flares slightly towards this other end. That means when you're assembling the frame, as you're pushing it through the timber or through the hole there and getting the joinery together, as it goes towards the end of where you're going to leave it permanently, that little bit of a flared end just holds it nice and tight in that hole. So I want it to slide through pretty easily at first and then kind of come to a stop partway through. I might be able to make that a little bit skinnier, but not a lot. That's not bad. So that's good. All right, so there's the peg. Like I said, other people prefer that it tapers from this location all the way to the point. I like the octagon on one end, and then you can see it's a nice little square on the other end. So when you're in a house or a barn, you see this octagonal end, and then you see this nice little square end at the other end. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the structural integrity of the peg, or it's not going to work better with this or less well. All that being said, I think a big reason that you use riven pegs versus turn pegs is because of how they look. It is a visual thing. They look really rustic, and it shows that you've made something by hand. This is something that you cannot produce with a machine. You cannot make a riven peg on any kind of CNC machine like that. It relies on the ability for a person to split the blanks out by hand, to put it on a shave horse, to judge what's going on with the grain. It's a lot of skill that just builds up over time, and it's impossible to replicate that with a machine. It can be boring to make pegs, to be honest. When you've got a big frame and you've got 200 pegs to make and you're sitting in the shop for 2 days doing nothing but sitting on the shave horse, But it's a very meditative process, and it only takes one job with 200 pegs before you get pretty good at it. So, thank you very much for watching. If you want to see what I use these pegs for, please go to lioncreekdesign.com and you can see some of my work there. And yeah, good luck.